Welcome back. Now what we need to do is that we need to work on calculating the total because here, for example, this shirt costs 79.99. However, the total is 100, which is incorrect. So let me head on over to the project to work on calculating the total. I'm gonna say function, and then calculate total cart, and this function is gonna take the request because we want to pass the request which contains the data request and also contains the session. So we need to say here what we need to do first, we need to access the session. So we need to say cart is equal to request session, and then we access the session. Request session get cart. And then we need to create two variables, a variable called total price and another variable called total quantity. So for these two variables, these variables will increase when we calculate the total. So initially they will be 0. So in order to calculate the total, you need to understand the logic behind calculating the total. Here for each, because we want to loop over the session, because the session, as I told you, is an array. So I'm going to say cart as ID product, because in the session the structure is that each product is stored in is associated with its key. So the key value pair is the ID and the product. So here what we want to do is that we need to get the product, and then we need to access that product. We need to say product is equal to cart ID, because we have now the ID of that product. Now that we have the product, we need to access the price and the quantity. So I'm going to access first the price. I'm going to say price is equal to product price, and then the quantity. So the quantity is equal to product quantity. Now that we have the price and the quantity, what we want to do is that we want to calculate the total. So I'm going to say total price is going to be equal to the old total price, which is going to be initially in the first iteration it's going to be 0, and then later it's going to keep increasing. So we need to get the total price and then add the current total price of the current product. So I'm going to say price multiplied by the quantity. In this iteration, we multiply the quantity by the price, and then we add that to the old total to get the total. And in the next iteration, we get the total and then multiply the price of the next product by its quantity to get the total price. For the total quantity, we need to say total quantity is equal to total quantity plus the quantity of that price, plus the quantity. However, the quantity is not important. What's important is the total price, but the reason why I calculated the quantity is because sometimes you might want to display it for the sake of just displaying it, or for the sake of doing something else with it, such as statistical analysis or something like this, or sales reports and things like that. Now once we are done, we just need to say request outside the loop. We need to say request session and then put, and then what we want to put is that we want to put the total price in the session. I'm going to say total price. So the total price is going to be stored in a key called total in the session. Similarly, I'm going to store the quantity. Again, the quantity is not very important, but I'm just going to store it if you want to use it. I'm going to say session put quantity. Quantity is total quantity. And we are done. Now, the last thing that we need to do is that we need to call this function. So where should we call this function? Well, we should call this function whenever we add something to cart, meaning that we need to call it from here and from here. So we need to call it before we return. Here, we should call it from here to make sure that, in order to make sure that the in order to make sure that the nothing has increased or decreased, and if something has increased or decreased, we recalculate the total. So we need to say here this and then calculate total cart, and we need to pass the request. And now here in the else we need to do the same thing. Before we return, we need to say this and then calculate total, and then we need to pass the request. So the last thing that we need to work on is that we need to display the total. So in the card.blade.php here we have this total, this number. We need to remove this number, and instead we need to say double curly braces, and then we need to say session and then get total. However, before we display the total, it's important to check whether we have a total or not. So here we need to say at if session has total. If we have the total, then we display the total. And here don't forget to say at and if, because we have two if statements. And I'm gonna move this outside. I'm gonna copy this, and then I'm gonna move it outside. So if we have a cart, then we will display this first, and then we check if we have a total, then we display the total here. We display the total here and here, and then the other if statement, I'm gonna move it, the end if, I'm gonna move it outside. I'm gonna say here like this, so now the end if will be outside. So again, let me explain this. First we check if we have a total, if we have a cart or not. If we have a cart, then we display here, we say total, and then we check the total. If we have a total, then we display it here. We display the total. And then we are done. Let me save everything and let me test. But before we test, make sure that you have here in this function, in the add to cart function, make sure in the else, make sure that you have here ID. If you forgot to add here the ID, you need to add the ID, because if you don't add the ID here, it's not going to work. So you need to say here ID is equal to request input ID, and then you need to pass the ID here. So this is very, very important. So let me now test. In order to test, I need to refresh the cart page. I'm gonna here go to the cart, and as you can see, the total now is 79.99, which is correct.